Jack met Sarah when he was 23 years old, and she was only 16. She was still studying at school, but even then she attracted attention with her cheerfulness and charming smile. They were introduced by a mutual acquaintance at a party, and Jack, despite the age difference, immediately felt sympathy for her. They began to communicate and later met. Sarah was young and carefree, and Jack was already a grown man. Their relationship developed rapidly, despite the condemnation and skepticism of those around them. It was a warm summer party in the backyard of a mutual friend's house. Sarah sat to the side, watching the others, shyly tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Jack spotted her in the crowd. She looked so innocent and detached from all the commotion around her that it affected him. They started talking, and after a few minutes Jack realized how special she was. Sarah had never had a boyfriend before, and her sincerity and naivety were so natural that Jack couldn't help but appreciate it. "You're definitely not from this party," he joked. "Why?" Sarah laughed, blushing a little. "You don't scream, run, or make silly videos like others." She smiled awkwardly. It was her first conversation with a boy, which sank so deeply into her soul. After that evening, Jack began writing to her frequently. They corresponded at night, discussed favorite books, music, and her school problems. Sarah began to trust him. It was her first relationship, and every meeting with Jack was a new discovery. He was her first love, the first to hold her hand, the first to give her flowers, the first to kiss her tenderly when she was worried about a math test. She told him everything, about her fears, dreams, plans after school. Jack supported her in everything, helped her with her studies, listened to her long stories about school dramas, and even went to her performances in the school choir. Sarah, in turn, looked at Jack and believed that they were meant for each other, because her heart beat only for him. Every day their relationship became closer. Jack introduced her to his friends, took her to nature, and invited her to his home. A few months into their dates, Sarah noticed that something was wrong with her. She began to feel constantly tired, although classes and preparation for tests had never exhausted her so much before. One morning when she was getting ready for school, she felt nauseous, and it made her think for the first time. "It's probably just stress," Sarah reassured herself, looking at her reflection in the mirror. But when the symptoms began to recur, and her period was delayed for the second week, her anxiety increased. She couldn't tell her parents about it, because they always had strict rules. Instead, she decided to talk to her best friend, Emma. "Do you think it is possible?" Sarah asked, sitting on the bed in her friend's room. "Well, you yourself understand how it happens," replied Emma, blushing slightly. "You need to take a test to know for sure." Sarah hesitated. She never bought such things and was afraid that someone would find out. But Emma promised to help. They walked into a drugstore in another neighborhood together, and even though Sarah was hiding the test in her bag, she felt like everyone was staring at her. She returned home, her heart pounding so hard it could be heard in the silence of the room. She closed the door and took the test. Tears filled his eyes as 2 clear lines appeared on the plastic strip. "Is it true?" she whispered, not believing her eyes. The feeling was mixed, fear, surprise, and at the same time a weak hope that everything could be resolved. Sarah knew she couldn't keep it to herself, and that evening, mustering all her courage, she called Jack. "Hello, Jack, can I come to you? We need to talk." Her voice was shaking, but Jack immediately noticed that something was up. "Of course, come. What happened?" "I'll tell you when I see you." Sarah pulled herself together and walked over to Jack's house, clutching a pregnancy test in her jacket pocket. Her fingers were trembling, and her heart was beating so hard that it seemed to be heard even over the noise of the street. She took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Jack opened it almost immediately, looking a little alarmed. "Sarah, what happened? You are all pale." He led her into the house, closing the door. I don't know how to say this," she began, choking back tears. Sarah carefully took the test out of her pocket and placed it on the table between them. "I'm pregnant, Jack," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Jack looked at the test in surprise, then at her. There was silence in the room for a few seconds. "Are you sure?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. "I took the test today. 2 lines. Jack, I'm afraid. What will happen now?" Jack leaned back, running his hands over his face. It was a shock. He didn't even know what to say, but one thing was clear. Sarah was important to him, and he couldn't leave her in this situation. "We'll make it," he said, leaning closer to her. "It's unexpected, but I'll be there. We will deal with this together." Sarah looked at him gratefully, tears streaming from her eyes. "And what about our parents, my school Jack? I don't know how to tell them." "We will tell when the time comes, but first we have to figure out what to do next. All that matters now is that we're in this together." He took her hand, squeezing her fingers in his. Sarah's parents were shocked by the news, but eventually accepted her choice and agreed to their marriage. They signed quietly, only with those closest to them. Sarah was wearing a simple white dress, and Jack was wearing a classic black suit. Despite the lack of a lavish ceremony, this day was special for them. After the wedding, Jack moved in with Sarah and her parents. At first, it was not easy. Their house was small, and Sarah's parents were still getting used to the new reality. Jack tried to help them in everything as much as he could. Sarah was finishing school, and Jack would see her out the door with a kiss every morning and help her with her homework at night. One evening, as they sat together on the old couch in the living room, Jack asked, "How do you feel? Is everything okay with the baby?" Sarah smiled, stroking her already visible belly. "Good. You know I'm lucky to have you. I can't imagine how I would manage on my own." "You'll never be alone," Jack replied, hugging her. But a year after the wedding, their lives changed. Their daughter, whom they named Lily, became the center of their attention, but along with parental responsibilities came strain in the relationship. Jack worked overtime to provide for the family, and Sarah felt locked in four walls. Her youth seemed to be wasted, and it saddened her more and more. Quarrels became commonplace. "You don't even understand how I feel," Sarah shouted when Jack came home from another long shift. "I work for us, Sarah. For you and Lily," he answered, trying to remain calm. "I want something more than to stay at home and be a mother. I'm still young. I want to see the world, have fun, be myself." "You have a family. This is your life now, and you have to accept it." Sarah often said she wanted to go somewhere with her friends or just be alone, but Jack wouldn't let her. "I love you, but I won't let you leave all this. We have a baby, and you can't just run away." One day, after another quarrel, Sarah disappeared. Jack woke up in the morning to find her gone. Her phone was switched off, and her belongings were left where they were. Jack was in a panic. He called her friends, visited familiar places, even contacted the police, but Sarah did not make herself known anywhere. 3 days dragged on endlessly. Jack hardly slept, leaving his daughter to her parents. His mind was filled with worst-case scenarios. On the evening of the third day, the door suddenly opened. Sarah walked into the house, looking exhausted but calm. "Where have you been?" Jack exclaimed, his voice shaking with anger and relief. Sarah lowered her head, looking away. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. Jack felt a chill down his spine. "Okay, speak." Sarah sat down on the sofa, her hands clenched nervously. "I'm pregnant, Jack," she said without looking up. The words fell like thunder from a clear sky. Jack froze as he considered them. "What?" he barely squeezed out. "Pregnant?" She finally looked at him. "It's your child," she added, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant, Jack," she repeated, this time more confidently. "Pregnant?" His voice trembled. Jack froze for a moment, absorbing the words. Different feelings were fighting in him. On the one hand, he was overjoyed that Sarah was back alive and well, but anger over her disappearance and silence kept him on edge. 3 days, Sarah. 3 damn days! He shouted sharply, walking around the room. "You didn't even call. You didn't even write. I thought something happened to you." "I know I was wrong," she answered through tears. "I needed to think." "Think? And about me? About Lily? Do you even understand what I went through?" His voice was sharp, but his face betrayed confusion. Sarah was silent, only wiping away tears. Jack stopped and took a deep breath. "And now you say you're pregnant." He looked at her cautiously. "I don't know where you are and who you were with and who this child is from. Maybe now you want to push someone else's child to me." Jack sat down heavily on the couch next to her, hands clasped together. He was angry that Sarah had made him spend those 3 days in the dark. But at the same time, he could not contain his joy. They will have another child. He covered his face with his hands and said quietly, "But I'm glad you're alive. Glad we're having another baby. And Sarah, I don't know if I can forgive you for the way you just took it and disappeared. I know I hurt you, Jack, but I promise that everything will be different. I won't run away anymore." Jack looked up and looked at her. There was both pain and hope in his gaze. "I hope you really understand that, Sarah, because I can't take it again." After Sarah's return, their life gradually returned to a normal rhythm. Jack plunged back into work, trying to provide a future for his family. Sarah stayed at home, taking care of little Lily, who was already beginning to say her first words and preparing for the birth of her second child. But their weekdays were full of tension. Sarah often felt lonely again. Her days seemed endless and boring. Morning worries, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Lily. She understood that pregnancy made her tired, but deep down, she was oppressed by the thought that she had lost her freedom. "Jack, you don't even understand how hard it is for me to be here alone," she once said one evening when he came home late and collapsed tiredly on the sofa. "Sarah, I work 12 hours a day so we can afford this life. What do you want me to do?" he answered without raising his voice, but his words were tired. "Maybe at least a little attention to me? I'm trying here too, and I'm not just a wife and mom. "I know who you are, Sarah," Jack interrupted. "But now we have to think about the children." Sarah silently got up and went to another room. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Jack, in turn, felt that he was on the edge. He loved Sarah, but her constant scolding only added to his stress. He did not know how to be a good husband, father, and provide stability for the family at the same time. Time passed. Sarah noticed that their conversations had become short and superficial. They talked only about everyday life. "Did you buy milk? Lily needs to see a doctor tomorrow." "How are you?" Jack asked, though his gaze remained fixed on the television screen. Sarah no longer felt the closeness they had before. However, there were also moments of joy. One evening, when they were sitting together in the kitchen, Lily suddenly stood up and took her first steps. Sarah squealed with happiness, and Jack rushed to the child, laughing. "It's a miracle, isn't it?" Sarah said, looking into Jack's eyes filled with pride. "Yes, it's a real miracle," he agreed, and their eyes met for a moment as they had long ago. But such moments became increasingly rare. Life became routine, and a crack began to form in their hearts. Sarah gave birth to a second child, a boy they named Nathan. It was a moment of pride and happiness for Jack. He held his newborn son in his arms and believed that with the appearance of another child, their lives would change for the better. Sarah seemed happy too. But one day Sarah disappeared from home again. Jack woke up in the night to his son Nathan crying and realized that she was not at home. Her phone was turned off and a note was left on the kitchen table. "I need some time. I'll be back. Sarah." Jack felt that his patience was at an end. He was left alone with his 2 children, trying to understand what was happening. Sarah did not return that night. Jack sat in an empty house, rocking little Nathan, who couldn't fall asleep. Lily slept in her room, but Jack himself could not find peace. Her sudden disappearance after the last conversation felt like a slap in the back. In the morning, when it became clear that Sarah would not return, Jack decided to act. He had been through this before and knew he couldn't just sit and wait. After feeding the kids and making sure they were safe, Jack opened Sarah's laptop. This time he didn't hesitate. He went into her correspondence. His heart sank with pain and indignation as he read the messages she sent to another man. "I can't take it anymore. I want to be with you, not him." "Then just come. We'll solve everything together. I'm waiting for you." The messages were sent a few days before she disappeared. Jack knew now that it wasn't just a text. Sarah seems to have actually decided to go to this man. "How could you do this to me? With children?" he whispered to himself, closing the laptop. Jack decided to stop searching. He realized that he could no longer fight for a relationship that was falling apart again and again. After taking the children, he returned to his house. Everything there was reminiscent of Sarah, but Jack made an effort to start life with a clean slate. The first months were difficult. Lily often asked about her mother, and Jack could hardly keep himself from saying something bitter. "Will Mom come back?" she asked, with the naivety that only a child can have. "Maybe, but for now you and Nathan have to take care of each other," Jack answered, trying to hide his pain. 6 months passed in constant worries about children and work. Jack got used to the new routine and even began to feel that his life was finally becoming stable. But one evening, his phone suddenly rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. At first, Jack wanted not to answer, but his fingers involuntarily clicked on the green icon. "Hello?" His voice sounded cold and detached. "Jack!" Sarah's voice was quiet and hesitant. "What do you want, Sarah?" His tone was harsh, but she seemed to expect it. "I have to tell you, I'm pregnant." Jack froze in place. His heart was pounding, but he held back. "And what does that have to do with me?" he finally answered. Sarah sighed. "I don't know who the child is from. I thought you should know." These words pierced Jack like a knife. He was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what he heard. "Are you serious now?" he finally asked. "You disappeared, left me with the children, and now you're coming back with such news. I'm not asking you to do anything, Jack. I just wanted you to know." Jack was silent for a long time before answering. "Sarah, I've been taking care of Lily and Nathan all this time. I tried everything to make our marriage work, but you made your own choice. I don't want to be a part of this chaos anymore." Sarah, on the other end of the line, tried to say something, but Jack cut her off. "You had a chance, Sarah. I gave you everything. But now I have another priority. My children. Goodbye." He hung up. Jack realized that this call was another attempt by her to draw him into the chaos he had been trying to escape from for so long. One evening, when Jack had put the children to bed and finally sat down to rest, there was a sudden knock at the door. He went over and opened it. Sarah was standing in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Jack asked, his voice cold but anxious. "Jack, please let me talk to you," she said quietly. He silently stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Sarah sat down on the sofa. "I know you have every right to hate me," she began, "but I have to tell you what happened." Jack crossed his arms over his chest, standing at a distance. "I'm listening." "That evening, when I left you, I was very angry and decided to cut my way through a dark street. And there a man attacked me and raped me." Jack is stunned. He didn't know what to say. "I couldn't go home after that," Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. "I could not look at you or at the children. I was ashamed. I felt dirty, guilty. I just ran away." Jack was still silent, trying to make sense of what he heard. "I lived with a friend," she continued. "He knew what I went through, and he gave me a place where I could recover at least a little." "And this child," Jack finally said, his voice shaking. "I don't know who it is from. It can be your child and his." Jack sat down, covering his face with his hands. He didn't know how to react. Anger, pain, compassion, and misunderstanding were fighting in him. "You should have told me, Sarah. You should have come back. I could help," he finally said, looking up. "I didn't know how. I was weak." Jack took a deep breath. "And what now? What do you want from me?" Sarah looked into his eyes. "I don't know, Jack. I just have no one else to go to." He felt that he was facing the most difficult choice of his life. On the one hand, he couldn't ignore what Sarah had been through, but on the other hand, her actions had caused him and the children so much pain that he didn't know if he could forgive. "I'll let you stay for a few days," Jack finally said, "but only because of the children. We need to figure out how to live on." Sarah nodded. Jack and Sarah decided to give their marriage another chance. Sarah returned home, and Jack welcomed her with all the hardships that had overtaken them. He promised himself that he would do everything possible so that the children grew up in a complete family, even if the pain and doubts continued to eat away at him. But if he knew what Sarah brought him this time and what awaits him, Jack became a loving father to both Lily and Nathan and Sarah's newborn child, whom they named Mia. Even though he had accepted her as his own, there were still questions in his heart. One day when Mia was 3 months old, Jack decided to do a DNA test. "I need to know the truth. It's for both of us." "Okay, Jack, I agree." They sent the samples to the laboratory and waited for the results. These days became a real test for Jack. His mind was filled with thoughts. What to do if Mia is not his child? Will he be able to stay in this marriage? Meanwhile, Sarah experienced unpleasant symptoms: weakness, fever, and strange rashes. Jack insisted that she see a doctor. When the doctors examined her, the news was shocking. Sarah had been diagnosed with syphilis, a venereal disease that may have been the result of the attack she was talking about. "Sarah, how could this happen?" Jack asked, trying to control himself. "It's because of that incident. I didn't know that something was wrong." The doctors recommended examining Jack as well. His results confirmed his worst fears. He too was infected. For several months, they both underwent a course of treatment. Jack, even though he was shocked, held on for the sake of the children. Sarah, feeling guilty, tried to be a caring wife, but their relationship remained strained. When the DNA test results finally came in, Jack opened the envelope and froze. It turned out that Mia is not his child. This truth was like thunder in the middle of a clear sky. Jack sat at the kitchen table, holding the sheet in his hands, and could not fathom what it meant for his family. When Sarah returned home that evening, Jack greeted her with a serious expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, placing the results on the table in front of her. Sarah paled at the sight of the document. She sat up and looked at him. You already know," she whispered. "Yes, I know. Mia is not my child." His voice was firm, but there was pain in it. "Why did you let me believe that?" Sarah bowed her head. "I didn't know how to tell you, Jack. I was afraid that you would leave me, that you would leave my children. You think I'll leave Lily and Nathan? They are my children, but you should have told me the truth." Jack raised his voice, but immediately pulled himself together. "Now that I know the truth, we need to decide how to live on." Sarah remained silent, her eyes downcast, while Jack collected his thoughts. "I'm staying here for Lily and Nathan," he said. "But between us, I don't know if I can continue to live as if nothing happened." Sarah cried, but Jack couldn't bring himself to hug her. He knew that their future had become even more uncertain. Still, Jack decided he would do everything he could to create a stable environment for his children, even if it meant living with the burden of that truth. Mia, although not his biological child, was still innocent in this situation. But the trust between him and Sarah was destroyed. Jack and Sarah stayed together. Despite all the difficulties, pain, and betrayal, Jack made a difficult decision to raise all the children as his own. Lily, Nathan, and even Mia became his main priority in life. He promised himself that he would do everything possible to make them grow up happy and protected. Sarah gradually realized that Jack was the only person she could truly rely on. He did not leave her, even when the truth hit him with all its force. His patience, care, and love for children became a lesson for her that she could not ignore. One evening, when the children were already asleep, Sarah approached Jack, who was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Jack, I want to tell you something," she began, her voice quiet but confident. He looked up, tired but attentive. "I know I hurt you a lot. I have made many mistakes, and I am thankful that you are still here by my side." Jack said nothing, but his eyes showed that he was listening. "I won't run away anymore," Sarah continued, her voice shaking. "I want to be better. For you, for children. I want to regain your trust if possible." "Sarah, I don't know if I can forget everything that happened," he answered. "I am staying for the sake of my children, for the sake of my family. We have to work together." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I will, Jack. I won't let you down again." Over time, their life began to stabilize. Sarah devoted herself to her family, trying to make up for the mistakes of the past. She learned to appreciate Jack's support and realized that his love was true and selfless. Jack, although he continued to live with doubts, found joy in raising children. Lily, Nathan, and Mia grew up feeling the love and care that Jack gave them. For them, he was a real father, regardless of biology. Despite all the difficulties, their family persevered. Jack and Sarah learned to overcome life's adversities together, realizing that the true strength of family is the ability to forgive, support each other, and move forward, even when everything seems lost. They left the past behind, learned to live in harmony and accept each other as they are. Although their path was thorny, it led them to understand that true family is those who are always ready to fight for you, even when it's the hardest. Their home, full of children's laughter and warmth, became a symbol of the fact that even from the greatest chaos, something real and unbreakable can be created. Jack and Sarah realized that love was not just a feeling, but a choice they made every day. And this choice kept them together until the end.